Now, this evening, the three coalition party leaders will meet with Housing Minister Darragh O'Brien to discuss whether to extend the eviction ban. Eoin Ó Broin is a Sinn Féin TD and he's the party housing spokesperson. Eoin, should they extend the ban?
They'll have to. It's important to remember when the government decided to introduce this temporary emergency ban in November, they did so because in October, on many nights, the majority of our local authorities had no emergency accommodation at all. 19 of them on a number of nights were full. We're now in a situation where, because exits from emergency accommodation due to the lack of social and affordable housing haven't been as strong as they should have been. So in fact, despite the fact that there has been a drop-off in people presenting as homeless, the actual numbers have increased over the last 3 months. If the government allows the ban on evictions to end at the end of March, when it's due to end, we will see in April, May and June a very, very significant number of singles, couples, families with children and indeed pensioners with eviction notices whose due dates fall from April 1st. That means they will have no homes to live in. They will be forced to present as homeless. And in some cases, we could see an increase in rough sleeping because of a lack of emergency accommodation, or indeed, as per TUSLA rules, families with children being presented and sleeping overnight in Garda stations. What I would say, however, is extending the ban in and of itself is not enough. We said to government when they introduced the ban in November, they also needed to introduce emergency measures to reduce the flow of singles and families into homelessness and to get people out of emergency accommodation more quickly. They failed to do that this time round, or the last time round, should I say, and therefore they extend the ban on evictions, which I feel they should do. They also need those emergency measures to reduce the number of people becoming homeless and get people out of homelessness more quickly.
Barry Ward, Gael Senator, should the government extend the eviction ban?
Well, I think the government has to think carefully about it. I don't agree with Eoin that they have to do it. But there is a constitutional context that has to be considered as well, and it may not be constitutional to extend it. That's something they'll have to take advice from the Attorney General on. But
why would it be constitutional to impose it but not extend it?
Because it was temporary, and it must be temporary, and that was the advice at the time. We have property rights within the Constitution that must be upheld, and if the government were to impose a permanent eviction ban, that would have implications for those property rights, and the general view is that would be unconstitutional. Where the timeline is on that is not clear, and that's something that may have to be tested. But the danger is, of course, that if it's extended, that somebody will choose to test it and it'll be taken to court, and thereafter the government loses control of where that happens. But the other difficulty with it is, leaving aside the possible unconstitutionality of it, is the unintended consequences. And Eoin talks about the possibility of increased rough sleepers. The first thing to note is that there is a bed for everybody. It may be an emergency bed, but there is no need for anybody to be rough sleeping in Dublin or in any other part of Ireland. But the unintended.
So why are they doing it?
Well, there are lots of reasons why people rough sleep. They may not like to go into the places that are available. There are obviously also people with addiction issues and mental health issues who are sleeping on the street, and that is true of every country and every city in the world. But the point that I'm making is that there are unintended consequences, and one of the things that Sinn Féin has repeatedly done over the last number of years, talking about the housing crisis, is beaten down on small landlords. And remember, the vast majority of landlords in Ireland are small landlords with less than 3 properties, up to 70% of them. The danger of pursuing a policy like this and insisting that it must be done is that you force them out of the market. So they're currently renting a property that's being lived in by somebody. If they exit the market, then that property is no longer in the rental sector, and that creates pressure in a different way for different people. And it's an unintended consequence that has kind of emerged from the pressure that Sinn Féin has put, or that the criticism that Sinn Féin have had of landlords. They put them down as an evil thing, but we are not in the 19th century. Most of those people are our neighbours and our friends, people who are accidental landlords in some cases. They're small landlords. They're not big commercial or institutional landlords who can afford to continue to have a problem with a tenant or a tenancy.
Oh, and do you accept the reality that a lot of those landlords are leaving the market?
Sure, although Barry's analysis of it is just wrong. Since 2017, single property landlords have been leaving the private rental sector steadily. I'm one of the few politicians who's been raising this matter when Eoin Murphy was Minister, now Darragh O'Brien, urging government to take a range of actions which they've failed to do. Landlords are leaving the market either A, because they were trapped in negative equity, there's now positive equity and they're exiting. B, they want the property for themselves. C, they're what we call pension pot landlords, people who made an investment with the view of getting a pension pot lump sum close in retirement. And see, there are a portion of landlords, although research from the Residential Tenancies Board shows that there are a small portion who are concerned about regulation and tax. I've been on this show, I don't know how many hundreds of times, and I've never once talked down, criticised or demonised landlords of any kind. The people responsible for the housing crisis are the government and its successive Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil policies that have created this situation where landlords are leaving. The problem, however, is those landlords are going. And again, the most recent data from the Residential Tenancies Board shows that that is a trend that is going to continue, and nothing government has done is change that. So what we need is, as those landlords are leaving, we have to do two things. The first is we have to ensure that as they leave, and they have every right to leave, whether they're selling or using the properties for themselves, we do everything we can to minimise levels of homelessness. There's a scheme, it's called Tenants in Situ. It allows local authorities to buy private rental properties with HAPA-RAS tenants in situ with eviction notices. I've made a series of recommendations to government both last October and again this week as to how they could increase and accelerate the use of that scheme. Landlord wants to sell, council buys it at market value, and you get an addition to the social housing stock and nobody homeless. I've urged government to extend that to affordable cost rental with approved housing bodies, something government hasn't done. But crucially, the reason why so many people under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael do not have a place to call home is because a failure of government to deliver social and affordable homes. 3 years government has missed their social and their affordable housing targets year after year after year. Again, I've made very detailed proposals to Darragh O'Brien as to how, using existing emergency powers for a short emergency period, we could increase and accelerate the delivery of social affordable homes. I agree with Barry on one thing. You cannot have a permanent ban on evictions. Of course you can't. In fact, I tabled amendments to the current ban on evictions to create separate carve-outs for property owners who themselves are at risk of homelessness to allow them to get their properties back, something this government wouldn't support. But at a point where official levels of homelessness are about to hit 12,000 and could go as far as 13,000 plus for a short time-limited period, we do need to extend the ban. We would not be here if government had taken the advice we had given them last year. So government needs to not only extend the ban, take the emergency action we've called for them to take, and that way there won't be a requirement to extend this for a third time.
Barry, a couple of issues I want your response on. Right, the first, tenants in situ and schemes like that. Doesn't go without saying that when a property is put up for sale by a landlord, that it has to leave the rental market. So should and could the government be doing more to encourage local authorities to avail of that scheme?
Well, the first thing is that when a person decides to sell the property, they very rarely want to do so with a tenant in situ because that decreases the value of the property. And that's a difficulty. And you can understand why people don't want to sell in those circumstances. And that's one of the difficulties with this policy and why it's driving landlords out. And I don't accept what Owen has said. I mean, I can't speak for I haven't read every one of Owen's pronouncements on the subject.
It hardly seems beyond the wit of man that the tenant in situ scheme could value a property with vacant possession, and then the local authority would buy it at that value.
No, it isn't, but that's again something that has been criticised by other circles, because what you're doing then is you're putting money into the pockets of private landlords, and this is why I said that Sinn Féin has, in my mind, demonised landlords at every level. They have made that word a bad word. I mean, we obviously have a very visceral historical association with that word in Ireland, but the reality is that I suggest, and as I say, I haven't read every one of Owen's pronouncements on it, but Sinn Féin has successfully demonised landlords, which has made it more attractive for them to leave the market. So what I'm suggesting is, and
do you think if a landlord was making money, they'd leave the market because Eoin Ó Broin said something nasty about them?
No, but I will tell you that landlords, and we hear it in the media on this station and others, landlords are leaving the markets because the market because they're finding it increasingly difficult, less profitable, and for many of them unsustainable because they have mortgage obligations. These are not institutional landlords we're talking about. They are ordinary people who might, by accident, because their families have grown or whatever, moved out of a smaller property, and they still have mortgage obligations. They may be in negative equity, although I think Owen is right, most of them probably aren't at this stage, but they've increased interest repayments on mortgages. Their mortgage cost is going up, and it's not always sustainable for them to stay in the market.
Supply was the other issue that Owen mentioned. That ultimately that's what this comes down to. The government have failed to hit supply targets. Darragh O'Brien made a big song and dance about hitting them, and then it was kind of revealed we didn't quite hit them last year. We're not going to hit them this year either, are we? The commencement notices for the end of last year are awful.
The government over a number of years has built and provided more social houses than were in the Sinn Féin targets. They've exceeded Sinn Féin's targets. The second thing is that we are now building more social houses than any time in my lifetime or Owen's lifetimes. So we have actually massively ramped up the delivery of housing. But it is always and it was always going to take time. Yes, it's a supply problem, but in the short term of dealing with the fact that if you pursue this policy, you will push private landlords out of the market, and you will take properties that are available to rent for people now out of commission and therefore unavailable to people in the rental market.
Owen, A, you're going to exacerbate the supply problem by extending the eviction ban. B, the government are actually beating what would be Sinn Féin's social housing targets?
Barry clearly can't count, because Sinn Féin's targets for public housing is 20,000 units a year. 2021, government delivered about 5,000, shy of their own target of 9,000. We don't have final figures for last year. It'll be about half what we committed to in our alternative budget. It's nowhere close to the need.
So before we get lost in the supply issue there, Barry, where did you get your figure from?
We can argue figures all day back and forth.
I
did bring them up. I'm not talking about the last 2 years specifically, because as Eoin very well knows, the supply of housing was massively interrupted by restrictions during COVID. But if you look back over the time since 2016 and later, we have consistently delivered more than Sinn Féin have said they would deliver. But of course, it's always easy to be the hurler in the ditch. Sinn Féin can promise 40,000 houses. They don't actually have to deliver on. The government actually has to cost these things and deliver them, and it is working on that. But as I say, yes, of course this is a supply problem. And that's why the government has a comprehensive plan to deliver housing. And the numbers of houses being delivered are going up and up and up every year. And as I say, in excess of what Sinn Féin
are they going to go up this year, do you suspect, and last year?
Yeah, in 2023 they will, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
On 2022, as Eoin says, we don't have final figures for 2022
Just to be clear, in 2016 I sat on a cross-party committee in the Oireachtas, and that committee agreed that we need at a minimum 10,000 new build social homes a year. That is what Sinn Féin is committed to on social housing, plus we have figures for affordable. Government, neither the last Fine Gael government on the confidence supply or the current government has met anything close to what that cross-party committee recommended, which is Sinn Féin's commitment. But also, let's just be very clear about one thing. In 4 weeks' time, the current ban on evictions ends. Now, I have to say, I don't think a ban on evictions is a good idea. I don't think it's a good thing. It is simply an emergency response to a crisis created by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Rents have never been higher and they're rising. House prices have never been higher than they're rising. Government social and affordable housing targets, which are too low to begin with, aren't being met. And we are going to have, in April and May and June, an increasing number of men and women, of children and adults with no homes to go to. So the reason why I'm saying is government is going to have to introduce an extension to what is a temporary ban on evictions is if they don't, we will have an increase in homelessness. But what I'm also saying is government has to get its head out of the sand and realise what it's doing on social and crucially on affordable housing delivery isn't adequate. 3 years this government has almost been in office. First year, no affordable homes. Second year, affordable homes in the tens. Last year, we don't have the figures yet, but there'll be a few hundred. And on social housing, 3 years in a row, they have missed their targets. That is the central reason why this homelessness crisis is rising. That is the central reason why young people have been forced to emigrate, including young people with good jobs. All I'm saying to government now is, if you don't extend this and take the emergency action we've outlined, things are going to get very much worse into the summer.
COVID construction bans may be impacted on some of those deliveries and hitting those targets. But I started with Eoin, so Barry, I'll finish with you. I mean, what do you say to people who do worry about the eviction ban ending in a couple of weeks and who are possibly facing homelessness? They know that the landlord wants or needs to sell the property.
And of course there are more than just the people who are actual tenants worrying about this, and I understand why they're worried. I don't agree with Eoin that house prices are higher now than they've ever been. I think that is not correct if you look back to pre-crash. I also don't understand how the housing crisis is Fine Gael's fault. It is the fault.
You've been in government for 11 years.
Yeah, but things
have never got worse.
You see, Eoin, well,
never been worse.
As you know very well, we were in government, we were not necessarily in power for all that time. The first 5 or 6 years the government was about reconstructing the economy, and the fault or the problem that existed is that there was a complete stagnation of building for a period of years at the time of the crash. That's the actual fault, and Fine Gael has been dealing with that ever since. But as you say, Kieran, the people who are worried about this are right to be worried, and that's why the government, the three parties leaders are meeting to consider that. I hope and believe they'll make the right decision, and what I'm saying is not that there shouldn't be a continuation of the eviction ban. They will have figures that I don't have, and they will know whether that's the right thing to do or not. What I'm saying is we have to think carefully about it, because there are two things that are worrying. First, the constitutional context whereby it might be illegal and unconstitutional and be challenged, and the second is the law of unintended consequences, where we might create other problems that haven't been foreseen by Sinn Féin.
Barry Ward, Fine Gael Senator, Eoin Ó Broin, Sinn Féin TD and Party Spokesperson on Housing. Thank you both very much for joining me in studio.